Picture this. Somewhere in what we now call France 40,000 years ago, a woman lies curled near the dying embers of a fire. The cave around her is silent except for the soft breathing of her family. Outside, the night is complete, absolute darkness. No streetlights, no distant glow of cities, nothing but stars and blackness. Her eyes move rapidly beneath closed lids. She's dreaming. But what is she seeing? Is she running from the cave lion that stalked her group last week? Is she hunting the great auroch, feeling the weight of her spear, the tension before the throw? Maybe she's seeing her mother, dead 2 winters now, offering her food across an impossible distance. Or perhaps she's witnessing something stranger. Patterns, symbols, visions that don't exist in the waking world but feel more real than reality itself. We'll never know what she saw that night. But here's what we do know. At some point in our history, something extraordinary happened inside the human mind. Our ancestors didn't just dream. They began to remember their dreams, to think about them, to believe they meant something. And somehow, those flickering visions in the dark became the seeds of everything that makes us human. Art, religion, story, symbol, meaning itself. Tonight we're going after one of the most fascinating and frustrating questions in all of human history. What did prehistoric people dream about? And how did those dreams transform our species from clever apes into beings who could imagine gods, paint masterpieces on cave walls, and eventually build civilizations? If you're using this to fall asleep, perfect. That's exactly why I make these. So maybe subscribe and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing the comments. Tokyo at sunrise, London at midnight, all of you scattered across the planet, all of us thinking about the same ancient mysteries at once. Here's the thing about dreams. Every human who's ever lived has had them. Your ancestors 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, they all closed their eyes and experienced that strange theatre of the mind we call dreaming. The hardware was the same brain structures, the same neurochemicals flooding through neural pathways, the same REM sleep cycles we experience tonight. But the content, the actual experiences they had while dreaming, that's where things get weird and wonderful and deeply mysterious. See, we dream about what we know. Modern humans dream about missing flights, showing up naked to work, scrolling endlessly through phones that don't quite work right. We dream in the language of our world, our technology, our anxieties, our culture. So what did people dream about when there were no cities, no agriculture, no writing, no words for abstract concepts we take for granted? What visions filled the minds of humans who lived in a world we can barely imagine? A world where every shadow might hide death, where fire was magic, where the boundary between human and animal felt thinner, more permeable. And here's the really mind-bending part. At some point, prehistoric humans started to believe their dreams were real. Not real in the way we understand it, but real in a different sense. Messages from another world, visions of the dead, prophecies, glimpses of a reality beyond the physical. This wasn't a mistake or primitive ignorance. This was the birth of symbolic thinking, the moment when humans began to understand that things could represent other things, that invisible worlds could exist alongside visible ones. That meaning could be layered, metaphorical, transcendent. And we can see the evidence in the caves of Europe, in burial sites across the world, in the archaeological record of ritual and art and deliberate meaningful action. Something changed in the human mind between 100,000 and 40,000 years ago. We didn't just get smarter. We started thinking in symbols, and dreams, those nightly journeys into the impossible, might have been the key that unlocked everything. So tonight we're going on a journey. We'll start with what modern neuroscience tells us about the dreaming brain, then travel back to imagine the raw material of ancient dreams, the animals, the dangers, the experiences that would have filled prehistoric minds each night. We'll explore how dreams might have sparked the explosion of cave art, how visions of the dead could have created the first religions, how the stories people told about their dreams became humanity's first mythology. This is a story about consciousness, creativity, and the strange, beautiful accident of the human imagination. A story about what happened when our ancestors lay down in the dark and their minds created worlds that didn't exist. Let's find out what they saw. Before we can understand what prehistoric humans dreamed about, we need to understand something fundamental. They had exactly the same dreaming brain you do, not similar, not close, identical. The neurological hardware that generates your dreams every night, the complex interplay of brain regions and neurotransmitters that creates those bizarre nighttime narratives, was already fully operational 300,000 years ago when the first anatomically modern humans appeared. Actually, it was probably functional much earlier than that. The basic architecture of the dreaming brain goes back millions of years. Here's how it works. Every night, your brain cycles through distinct stages of sleep. Light sleep, deep sleep, and then something remarkable happens. About 90 minutes after you drift off, you enter REM sleep. Rapid eye movement. Your eyes start darting back and forth beneath your closed lids, tracking things that don't exist. Your muscles become paralyzed, locked in place so you don't act out what you're experiencing. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes irregular, and your brain lights up like a fireworks display. During REM sleep, the visual cortex erupts with activity, creating the imagery you see in dreams. The amygdala, your emotion center, goes into overdrive, which is why dreams feel so intensely emotional, why you can wake up terrified from a nightmare or euphoric from a beautiful dream. The hippocampus, where memories are stored, starts firing semi-randomly, pulling fragments of experience from storage and feeding them to other brain regions. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logical thinking and critical analysis, mostly shuts down. This is why dreams feel perfectly normal while you're having them, why you can fly or talk to the dead or find yourself back in high school without questioning any of it. Your prehistoric ancestors had all of this. Same brain regions, same neurotransmitters, same nightly cycle. We know this because the basic structure of mammalian sleep is ancient. Dogs dream, cats dream. Even rats show clear signs of REM sleep, their whiskers twitching as they mentally replay the mazes they ran during the day. If rats dream, then certainly the humans who lived 50,000 years ago were having vivid, complex dreams every single night. But here's where it gets interesting. They probably dreamed more intensely than you do. Modern humans sleep differently than our ancestors. We've trained ourselves to sleep in one consolidated block, usually at night, usually for 6 to 8 hours. We call this monophasic sleep, and it's actually pretty unusual in human history. It's a relatively recent invention, tied to the development of artificial lighting, industrial work schedules, and urban living. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer populations, people living in conditions similar to our prehistoric ancestors, show a completely different pattern. The Hadza people of Tanzania, the San of southern Africa, the Ache of Paraguay, they all practice what researchers call polyphasic or biphasic sleep. They sleep in multiple periods throughout the day and night, a few hours after dark, then awake for an hour or two in the middle of the night, then sleep again until dawn, often with a long midday nap thrown in. This wasn't laziness or inefficiency. It was actually the optimal survival strategy. That middle-of-the-night wake period served crucial functions. Someone needed to tend the fire, watch for predators, nurse babies. but it also created something else. A liminal state between sleeping and waking. A time when the boundary between dreams and reality became permeable. Anthropologists studying the Hadza have documented what happens during these midnight wake periods. People lie in the darkness, not fully awake, not fully asleep. They talk quietly about their dreams. They interpret visions. They tell stories. The dreams from the first sleep cycle are still vivid, still emotionally present, and people process them together in the dim glow of the fire. This is probably how your ancestors experienced dreams, not as disconnected nighttime experiences that fade quickly in the morning rush, but as events woven into the social fabric of the group, dreams that were discussed, interpreted, remembered, and integrated into the community's collective knowledge. And the fire was crucial. Every night for at least 400,000 years, and probably much longer, human groups gathered around fires. The flickering light created dancing shadows. The smoke drifted and swirled, creating phantom shapes. The crackling and popping of burning wood provided an auditory backdrop. People told stories, sang, performed rituals. Then they slept, their minds primed with all this sensory input, their brains ready to weave it into dreams. When they woke in the middle of the night, the fire was still there, still flickering, creating that hypnagogic state where dreams and reality blur together. You could watch the shadows and almost see the animals you'd just been dreaming about, almost see the spirits your grandmother had told you stories about before she died. This was dream incubation, though they wouldn't have called it that. The deliberate creation of conditions that produce vivid, memorable, meaningful dreams. And unlike modern humans who wake to alarm clocks and electric lights and immediately check their phones, prehistoric humans woke to darkness and firelight and community. Their dreams had space to breathe, time to be remembered, social context that made them meaningful. But there's something else that would have made prehistoric dreams more intense. Darkness. Real darkness. Not the artificial darkness of your bedroom with light bleeding in around the curtains and the glow of electronic devices. Not the light-polluted night sky of modern cities where you can barely see the stars. Total, absolute, primal darkness. The kind of darkness where you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face once you move away from the fire. Your brain evolved in this darkness. For millions of years, human ancestors spent every night in conditions where vision, our dominant sense, became useless. This creates a sensory deprivation that intensifies internal experiences. Dreams become more vivid because there's no competition from external stimuli. The visual cortex, deprived of real input during waking hours in darkness, goes into overdrive during REM sleep. Modern studies have confirmed this. People who spend time in environments without artificial light report more vivid, more memorable, more emotionally intense dreams. Their brains, freed from constant visual stimulation, produce richer internal imagery. Your ancestors lived in this state continuously. Every night was an opportunity for extraordinary dreams, and it wasn't just modern humans. This is where the story gets really wild. Neanderthals almost certainly dreamed too. They had brains larger than ours, with all the same basic structures. They had complex social groups, burial, practices that suggest symbolic thinking, and they definitely slept. There's no reason to think their dreaming life was any less rich than that of modern humans. The Denisovans too. Every human species that survived the bottleneck carried the same basic neurological equipment for dreaming. When a Neanderthal hunter in Ice Age Europe lay down to sleep 50,000 years ago, his brain cycled through the same stages yours does. REM sleep occurred on roughly the same schedule. His visual cortex activated, his amygdala processed emotions, His hippocampus served up memories to be woven into nighttime narratives. What did he dream about? We'll never know the specific content, but we can be certain he dreamed. Perhaps about the mammoth his group was tracking, about the woman from another band he'd met at a seasonal gathering, about his dead father, whose carefully prepared grave he still visited, about the spirits his mother said lived in the cave where they sheltered through the winter. The same was true across Africa, wherever groups of early modern humans made their camps. In Asia, where Denisovan bands moved across mountains and coastlines. Every night, thousands of human minds were generating dreams, processing experiences, creating internal narratives. Some of these dreams were probably mundane, the mental equivalent of defragmenting a hard drive, sorting through the day's memories and filing them away. But others must have been extraordinary, because the human brain doesn't just passively process during dreams. It creates, it synthesizes new combinations, it sees patterns that don't exist in waking life. It generates insights, solutions, and visions. And prehistoric humans, unlike us, had no framework to dismiss their dreams as mere neurological noise. They didn't know about brain chemistry or REM sleep or memory consolidation. When they had a vivid dream, when they saw their dead grandmother speaking to them, when they flew over the landscape or transformed into an animal, these experiences were real. Not metaphorically real, actually real. Different from waking life, perhaps, but no less valid. Maybe even more valid because dreams revealed things that ordinary perception couldn't. This belief wasn't primitive or ignorant. It was actually quite reasonable given what they could observe. Dreams predicted things that then happened. You dream of finding water in a certain direction, and the next day you find it. Coincidence, we would say. Prophecy, they might have said. You dream of a dead relative warning you about danger, and the next week a lion attacks near your camp. Random, we would say. Ancestral protection, they might have believed. Over thousands of generations, this interpretation of dreams as meaningful, as potentially prophetic, as a connection to something beyond ordinary reality, became woven into human culture. Not because people were stupid, but because dreams are genuinely mysterious. Even now, with all our neuroscience knowledge, we can't fully explain why we dream or what all dreams mean. Your ancestors, lacking that scientific framework, developed their own explanations, and those explanations made dreams even more important, more memorable, more worthy of attention and interpretation. So every night, in camps and caves across Africa, Europe, and Asia, humans slept and dreamed. Their brains produced the same electrochemical processes yours does, but their dreams entered a world where they mattered in ways modern dreams rarely do, where they were discussed, interpreted, remembered, and acted upon, where they shaped decisions, influenced relationships, and connected the living with the dead. The neurological hardware was identical to yours, but the software, the cultural context that gave dreams meaning, that was something else entirely. And it was shaped by the world they lived in, a world so different from yours that its dreams must have been filled with things you can barely imagine. Before we can understand what prehistoric humans dreamed about, we need to understand the world they lived in. Because dreams don't come from nowhere. They're built from experience, from memory, from the raw material of daily life processed and recombined during sleep. And the world that shaped prehistoric dreams was unlike anything most of us can imagine. Picture a Paleolithic evening, maybe 50,000 years ago. You're part of a band of 25 people camped in a river valley. The sun is setting, and you're gathering around a fire. Not a campfire like you'd make on a weekend camping trip. This fire is everything. It's your heat source, your light, your protection, your social center. Without it, you die. As darkness falls, the world beyond that small circle of firelight becomes something else entirely. Not just dark, but profoundly, absolutely dark in a way that modern humans almost never experience. No streetlights, no distant glow of cities, no flashlights. Just darkness so complete that you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face. And in that darkness, things are moving. You can hear them. The cough of a cave lion somewhere in the distance. The crack of branches as something large moves through the forest. The whoosh of enormous wings as a short-faced owl, with a wingspan of 12 feet, passes overhead hunting for prey. Every sound triggers your threat detection system, activating the same neural circuits that will later reactivate during your dreams. This is the world that shaped prehistoric consciousness, and it was populated by creatures that would seem mythological to us today. Cave bears that stood 12 feet tall on their hind legs and weighed 3,000 pounds. Woolly mammoths and straight-tusked elephants that dwarfed modern elephants. Saber-toothed cats with 7-inch fangs designed to pierce the thick hides of megafauna. Giant ground sloths, massive cave hyenas, dire wolves hunting in packs of 30 or more. These weren't occasional encounters. These were your neighbours, your competitors, your predators, and sometimes, if you were skilled and lucky enough, your prey. Every single day involved life or death calculations. Should we track that mammoth herd even though there are cave lions in the area? Is that rustling in the bushes an edible animal or something that wants to eat us? Can we cross this river, or will the current sweep the children away? Will this plant nourish us or kill us? These experiences didn't just disappear when you fell asleep. Modern neuroscience has shown that the brain uses sleep, particularly REM sleep, to process and consolidate the most emotionally significant experiences of the day. And when every day involves potential death, those are the experiences that get processed most intensely. This led some researchers to develop what's called the threat simulation theory of dreaming. The idea is elegantly simple. Dreams evolved as a kind of virtual reality training program, allowing our ancestors to rehearse responses to dangerous situations without the actual risk of dying. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. You've got two groups of early humans. Group A has brains that use sleep time to randomly process memories with no particular pattern. Group B has brains that specifically replay and remix threatening situations, allowing them to practice escape routes, attack responses, and danger recognition. Which group survives better? Which group's children inherit the earth? The answer is obvious, and the evidence shows up in modern dreams. Even today, when most of us live in relatively safe environments, studies show that threatening situations appear in dreams far more often than they occur in waking life. We dream about being chased, about falling, about dangerous animals, about conflict and aggression. For prehistoric humans, this threat rehearsal would have been even more critical. A young hunter who dreams about tracking a bison herd and encounters a cave lion in the dream gets to practice his response. Does he freeze, run, slowly back away? His sleeping brain can try different responses, evaluate which ones trigger feelings of safety versus panic, and essentially program better reactions for when the real situation occurs. But dreams weren't just about predators and prey. Some of the most complex challenges prehistoric humans faced were social. In a band of 25 people living in intimate proximity, every relationship matters. Your survival depends not just on avoiding lions, but on maintaining cooperative relationships with the people around you. You need them for hunting, for gathering, for childcare, for defense. But you're also competing with them for status, for mates, for resources. This creates incredibly complex social dynamics. Who do you trust? Who's reliable in a crisis? Who's trying to undermine your position in the group? Which potential mate is worth pursuing? How do you resolve conflicts without destroying the group cohesion that everyone depends on? Modern sleep research shows that we spend enormous amounts of our dream time processing social interactions. We dream about conversations, about conflicts, about sexual encounters, about cooperation and betrayal. Our sleeping brains are constantly running social simulations, trying out different strategies, evaluating different approaches. For prehistoric humans, these social dreams would have been just as critical as threat simulation dreams. A hunter who dreams about a conflict with another group member gets to try different responses. Maybe in the dream he responds with aggression and the conflict escalates. Maybe he tries reconciliation and the relationship improves. His sleeping brain evaluates which approach feels more adaptive, which creates more anxiety versus relief. The same applies to dreams about potential mates. Sexual dreams aren't just random entertainment. They're part of how the brain evaluates potential partners, processes attraction, and navigates the incredibly complex dynamics of human mating. For prehistoric humans living in small bands, where choosing the wrong partner could have catastrophic social consequences, these dreams would have been crucial navigation tools. Then there's the environmental content. The Paleolithic period wasn't one stable climate. It spanned the wild fluctuations of the ice ages, periods when massive glaciers advanced and retreated, when coastlines appeared and vanished, when forests turned to grasslands and grasslands to deserts. Prehistoric humans had to be incredibly adaptive. A band that had lived in one valley for generations might find their territory becoming uninhabitable, too cold, too dry, game animals migrating elsewhere. They'd have to move, carrying everything they owned, leading children and elders across unfamiliar landscapes, searching for new territories that weren't already occupied by other groups. These migrations would have filled their dreams with landscape imagery, dreams of valleys and rivers, of mountains that need crossing, of coastlines and islands. Modern research shows that our brains use sleep to consolidate spatial memories, building cognitive maps of our environment. For prehistoric humans constantly moving through changing landscapes, this spatial processing would have been critical. Imagine dreaming after a day of travelling through unknown territory. Your sleeping brain reviews the landmarks you passed, that distinctive rock formation, the river crossing where the current was strongest, the tree line where you saw fresh lion tracks. It's creating a mental map, helping you navigate if you need to return, preparing you for tomorrow's journey. Seasonal changes would have dominated this environmental processing. The transition from summer abundance to winter scarcity, the timing of animal migrations, the locations of reliable water sources during droughts, the signs that predicted storms or early freezes. All of this information needed to be learned, remembered, and passed on to the next generation, and dreams would have been part of that information consolidation process. But there's another element we need to consider: the sheer sensory richness of the prehistoric world. Modern humans live in relatively monotonous sensory environments. We see the same streets, the same buildings, the same screens every day. We eat the same foods. We experience temperature-controlled environments. Even when we go camping, we bring our civilization with us. Prehistoric humans experience constant sensory novelty. Every day brought new sights, sounds, smells, tactile experiences, the texture of animal fur as you process a kill, the overwhelming smell of a mammoth herd, the taste of a fruit you've never tried before, the sensation of cold water as you ford a river, the particular quality of light during a storm, the sound of wind through a canyon you're exploring for the first time. All of these sensory experiences would flow into dreams, creating a richness of imagery that we might struggle to imagine. Dreams built from genuine wilderness encounters rather than second-hand experiences through screens and books. And throughout all of this, threading through every dream, would be that fundamental experience of darkness, the profound, absolute darkness that descended every night, the darkness that brought vulnerability and danger, the darkness broken only by fire and stars and sometimes the moon. This darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it was a presence, something that shaped consciousness in ways we're only beginning to understand. Recent studies of people living without artificial light show that their dreams are different, more vivid, more emotionally intense, more integrated with waking consciousness. For prehistoric humans, every night meant surrendering to that darkness, lying down in a world full of predators and dangers, trusting your group to maintain the fire and keep watch, letting consciousness slip away into vulnerability. The act of falling asleep itself was an act of trust and courage that modern humans, sleeping in locked houses with walls and roofs, barely need to consider. And when they dreamed in a context we've lost. Dreams experienced not as bizarre interruptions of normal life, but as another mode of consciousness, equally real and potentially equally important as waking experience. This is the raw material that prehistoric dreams were built from. Predators and prey, social bonds and conflicts, changing landscapes and seasonal cycles, sensory richness and profound darkness, life or death stakes on a daily basis. But raw material is just the beginning, because at some point something changed. Dreams stopped being just threat simulations and social processing. They became something else entirely. They became visions, they became messages, they became portals to other worlds. The question is, when and how did that transformation happen? Imagine you're lying in a cave around 80,000 years ago. The fire has burned down to embers, casting just enough light to see the shapes of your family sleeping nearby. You close your eyes, and then something extraordinary happens. You're running across the savannah, but you're not yourself anymore. You're the antelope you hunted yesterday. You feel its terror, its desperate speed, the moment the spear pierced its side. Then the dream shifts. The antelope speaks to you. Not in sounds, but in understanding. It tells you where its herd will be tomorrow, shows you a waterhole you've never seen before. You wake up. And for the first time in human history, you don't just remember images from your sleep. You understand that they mean something. This is the moment everything changed. The moment when dreams stopped being random neural firing and became messages, prophecies, visions. When the human brain learned to think in symbols. When we became, in the most fundamental sense, truly modern humans. Anthropologists call it the cognitive revolution. That moment, somewhere between 100,000 and 70,000 years ago, when human thinking transformed from concrete to abstract, when we stopped just seeing a lion and started understanding what a lion could represent. Power, danger, courage, death. When we began to think not just in objects and actions, but in meanings and metaphors. The archaeological evidence for this revolution shows up suddenly and dramatically. Before about 100,000 years ago, human artifacts are almost entirely functional. Stone tools, weapons, maybe some basic fire management. Useful stuff, but nothing that suggests abstract thinking. Then, almost like someone flipped a switch, the archaeological record explodes with symbolism. Beads made from shells carried hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean. Ochre, a red pigment with no practical use, ground up and stored carefully. Pierced shells that could only have been worn as jewellery or decoration. And most spectacularly, the first undeniable art. Geometric patterns scratched into ochre. Abstract designs carved into ostrich eggshells. Eventually, the magnificent cave paintings that would cover the walls of Europe and Africa. This wasn't gradual. This wasn't slow evolutionary change taking millions of years. This was sudden. A transformation that happened in maybe 30,000 years, which in evolutionary terms is basically instantaneous. Something fundamentally changed in how the human brain processed reality. We learned to see meaning behind things, to understand that one object could represent another, that a scratched line could be a boundary, a circle could mean the sun. A handprint on a cave wall could say, I was here, I existed, I mattered. But here's the really wild question that keeps researchers up at night. What caused this revolution? What transformed our ancestors from sophisticated but concrete thinkers into creatures capable of art, religion, abstract reasoning, and symbolic communication? And more importantly for our story, what role did dreams play in this transformation? Think about it. Dreams are the original virtual reality. Every night, our ancestors lay down and experienced impossible things. They flew without wings. They talked to the dead. They watched animals transform into humans and humans into animals. They visited places that didn't exist. Time bent and twisted. Cause and effect broke down. The normal rules of reality simply didn't apply. For a brain that thinks concretely, that only understands the immediate physical world, dreams must have been deeply confusing. Just random noise, images that meant nothing. But once you develop symbolic thinking, dreams become something else entirely. They become a space where symbols can interact, where meanings can combine and recombine in ways that would never happen in waking life. Some researchers think dreams might have actually caused the cognitive revolution, that the human brain's attempt to make sense of these nightly visions forced it to develop symbolic thinking. You dream you're an eagle. Your concrete mind says, impossible, you're human. But some part of your brain, desperate to make sense of the experience, starts thinking, what if I'm not literally an eagle, but the dream means something about eagles, about flying, about seeing from above? That's a symbolic thought. That's your brain learning that things can represent other things, that reality has layers of meaning beyond the immediate and physical. Other researchers think it went the opposite direction. That symbolic thinking evolved for other reasons, maybe from the need for complex language or social organization, and once we had it, dreams suddenly became meaningful, like getting a new translation app that suddenly lets you understand a language you've been hearing but not comprehending. The truth is probably somewhere in between. A feedback loop where developing symbolic thinking made dreams more meaningful, and meaningful dreams reinforced symbolic thinking. Each night becoming a practice session for abstract reasoning, a safe space where the rules of reality could be suspended and new ways of understanding could be explored. There's this controversial but fascinating theory called the bicameral mind hypothesis. It suggests that early humans experienced their own thoughts differently than we do, that internal voices, inspirations and dreams weren't recognized as coming from within, but were experienced as external voices, the voices of gods, ancestors, or spirits. Now, mainstream science is pretty skeptical of this theory in its full form, but the basic insight is compelling. Early humans probably didn't have the same clear boundary we have between internal and external experiences. Dreams, hallucinations, intense thoughts, they all might have felt equally real and equally external. In this context, dreams wouldn't just be interesting. They'd be supernatural experiences, actual visits to other realms, real communications from beings beyond the physical world. A dream where your dead grandmother spoke to you wasn't a memory or wish fulfillment. It was your grandmother's spirit actually communicating across the boundary between life and death. This explains so much about how human culture developed. Every archaeological culture we've found, from the earliest symbolically thinking humans to the present day, has had beliefs about dreams being meaningful, not just interesting, not just worth thinking about, but actually important. Messages that needed to be interpreted, warnings that needed to be heeded, visions that needed to be shared. For our ancestors around 80,000 years ago, a symbolic thinking was emerging and spreading through human populations. Dreams must have been revolutionary. They were experiencing something fundamentally new, not just images during sleep, but a whole parallel world of meaning and significance. Consider what this meant practically. You're a hunter in a small band, and you dream about a waterhole in a direction you've never explored. Do you ignore it as just random neural noise, or do you follow the dream, treating it as genuine information about the world? In a brain without symbolic thinking, the question doesn't even arise. The dream is just confusion, quickly forgotten. But in a brain with symbolic thinking, the dream becomes data. Maybe not as reliable as direct observation, but information nonetheless. Information that could lead you to water during a drought. Information that could save your family's life. So you follow the dream. And maybe one time in 10, one time in 20, you actually find water roughly where the dream suggested. Not because the dream was supernatural, but because your sleeping brain was processing patterns and information you'd noticed, but not consciously registered. Slight changes in vegetation indicating underground water, flight patterns of birds, subtle terrain features that suggested drainage patterns. Your conscious mind didn't put it together, but your dreaming brain, free from the constraints of logical thinking, made the connection. The dream wasn't mystical, but it was useful, and for a human living on the edge of survival, useful dreams would be selected for just as surely as useful genes. This is where dreams and evolution intersect in the most fascinating way. Brains that could generate useful symbolic dreams, and more importantly brains that could recognize and act on symbolic meaning in dreams, would have significant survival advantages. Over thousands of generations, this selection pressure would wire human brains for symbolic dreaming and symbolic interpretation. The archaeological evidence suggests this happened fast. By 70,000 years ago, humans everywhere we find them show signs of symbolic thinking. They're making art, wearing decorations, conducting rituals. They're living in a world of meaning, not just objects. And that means they're dreaming in symbols too. Picture that moment of transformation. A child, maybe around 50,000 years ago, having what might be humanity's first truly symbolic dream. Not just images of things that happened or fears of things that might happen, but actual metaphor, dreaming of a seed becoming a tree and understanding it as a symbol of growth, of potential, of time and transformation. That child wakes up changed. They've experienced meaning itself. They've felt what it's like when something represents something else, when the concrete becomes abstract, when reality has layers. They try to explain it to their parents, their tribe. Maybe they scratch shapes in the dirt, trying to capture what they saw. The seed, the tree, the connection between them. It's clumsy, inadequate, but it's communication. It's the beginning of art, of metaphor, of all the symbolic thinking that would eventually build civilizations. And it started in dreams. In that liminal space between waking and sleeping where the rules of reality soften and the impossible becomes, for a moment, real. Where a human brain could learn to see meaning behind things, patterns within patterns, symbols within symbols. We'll never know exactly how it happened. We can't observe the moment when our ancestors' dreams transformed from noise into meaning. But we can see the results, written in ochre and carved in stone, painted on cave walls and threaded on shell beads, the evidence that humans learned to think symbolically. and in doing so learn to dream in a way no other species ever had or ever would. What came next changed everything. Because once you can think symbolically, once your dreams carry meaning, you can do something entirely new, something that would define human culture forever. You can create permanent records of those dreams. You can make your visions last beyond the moment of waking. You can share your dreams not just through words that vanish in air, but through images that persist through time. You can paint your dreams on the walls of caves. Now imagine you're standing at the entrance to Chauvet Cave in southern France. The year is 1994. 3 explorers have just squeezed through a narrow passage and dropped down into a chamber that hasn't been disturbed for over 30,000 years. They shine their lights across the walls, and what they see stops them cold. Hundreds of animals surge across the rock face, lions prowling, rhinoceroses charging, wild horses galloping in perfect formation. But these aren't just drawings. They're alive somehow, positioned to catch the flicker of torchlight, creating the illusion of movement in the dancing shadows. And then they notice something else. Deeper in the cave, past chambers filled with aurochs and mammoths, they find something that makes no sense at all. A figure, half human, half bison, standing upright like a person, but with the massive shoulders and head of a beast. What were they looking at? What had compelled someone 30,000 years ago to crawl deep into the earth and paint impossible creatures on cave walls? Here's the thing that most people don't realize about Paleolithic cave art. These weren't living spaces. Nobody was setting up camp in Chauvet Cave or Lascaux or Altamira. The paintings aren't near the entrances where you might actually want to spend time. They're deep inside, sometimes hundreds of meters underground, through passages so narrow you have to crawl, into chambers so dark that without artificial light you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face. Why would anyone do this? Why take precious resources, animal fat for lamps, mineral pigments that had to be gathered and processed? Why carry all of that deep into the earth just to paint on walls that almost nobody would ever see? Unless they weren't meant for the living. Unless these caves were doorways to somewhere else. The shamanic hypothesis suggests something remarkable, that these caves were theatres of consciousness, places where specially trained individuals, shamans, would go to enter altered states, to dream while awake, to journey into the spirit world and bring back visions that their communities needed to see. Think about what happens when you enter a deep cave. All sensory input from the normal world disappears. No sunlight, no wind, no sounds except your breathing, and maybe water dripping somewhere in the darkness. The temperature is constant, neither hot nor cold. Time loses all meaning. Your brain, deprived of normal stimuli, starts doing something strange. It begins generating its own input. Patterns emerge in the darkness. Sounds become significant, and if you stay long enough, if you fast or use psychoactive plants or simply exhaust yourself through ritual dancing and chanting, the boundary between inner and outer reality starts to dissolve. This is what neuropsychologists call an entoptic phenomenon. When you close your eyes and press on your eyelids, you see geometric patterns, dots, grids, zigzags, nested curves. These aren't external images. They're the architecture of your own visual cortex, the basic wiring of human perception becoming visible. Every human who has ever lived sees these same patterns in altered states. Doesn't matter if you're a modern scientist or a Paleolithic hunter, the hardware is identical. Now look at the oldest cave paintings, not the beautiful naturalistic animals that everyone knows, but the other images. The dots scattered across walls in El Castillo Cave in Spain, dated to over 40,000 years ago. The grids and ladder patterns in Lascaux. The nested U-shapes in Altamira. These are entoptic phenomena. These are the geometric hallucinations that appear in the early stages of trance, carefully recorded on cave walls. But the shamanic journey doesn't stop there. As the trance deepens, something else happens. The geometric patterns start transforming. They become meaningful. They turn into animals, spirits, beings. And this is where cave art gets truly weird. In Lascaux, there's an image in the deepest part of the cave called the Shaft of the Dead Man. A human figure, drawn crudely compared to the magnificent animals elsewhere in the cave, appears to be falling or floating. Next to him is a bison, beautifully rendered, clearly dying from a spear wound. But the human has a bird's head, or he's wearing a bird mask, or maybe he's transforming into a bird. Nobody knows. Next to the scene stands a pole with a bird perched on top. What does it mean? The shamanic interpretation suggests we're looking at a vision, possibly a dream, definitely an altered state experience. The human-bird hybrid is the shaman himself, transformed during his journey. The dying bison might represent a successful hunt that was foreseen in the vision, or it might be something more metaphorical, a spiritual death and rebirth. The bird on the pole could be a spirit guide, the helper that accompanies shamans on their journeys between worlds. This happens again and again in cave art. Human figures with animal characteristics. In Chauvet, the bison man. In Les Trois Frères, the famous sorcerer. A figure with human legs, a horse's tail, a bison's head, and owl's eyes. In Gabelou Cave, a figure that's half human, half reindeer. These aren't gods exactly. Not yet. They're something else. They're transformations. They're the experience of ego dissolution that happens in deep trance states, when the boundary between self and other disappears, when you become the animal you're hunting, when you merge with the spirit world. And then there are the handprints, hundreds of them, in caves all across Europe and beyond. Most are negative prints, made by placing a hand on the wall and blowing pigment around it, leaving a shadow, an absence, a ghost hand reaching through millennia. Some are positive prints, palms pressed directly onto rock with paint-covered hands, and some, disturbingly, are missing fingers, either actual individuals who had lost digits or deliberate finger bending to create strange patterns. These handprints cluster around the painted animals, the geometric patterns, the hybrid figures. They're saying something. Maybe I was here. Maybe this vision belongs to me. Maybe I reach through the membrane between worlds and touch the other side. When you stand in front of these handprints today, 30,000 years later, you can place your own hand over them and match perfectly. The person who made that print had a hand exactly like yours. Same bone structure, same proportions. They were human in every way that matters, but their minds were doing something extraordinary. They were using these caves as engines of vision, as amplifiers of the dreaming consciousness. The acoustic properties support this. Many painted chambers have remarkable resonance, a low hum. In Lascaux's Hall of Bulls fills the entire space with sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. Experiments have shown that the most densely painted areas often correspond to locations with the strongest acoustic effects. Sound and vision merging, creating a fully immersive altered state experience. The caves themselves might have been chosen specifically for their womb-like qualities. Narrow passages forcing you to squeeze through, to be reborn into the darkness. Chambers that open up like organs of the earth. Formations that look like curtains, cascades, frozen waterfalls of stone. You're inside something, inside the body of the world maybe, inside the collective unconscious of your tribe, inside the dreaming mind of existence itself. And what did they see there? What visions emerged from the darkness that were important enough to record permanently on stone? They saw the animals they lived with, but not as they appeared in daylight. These are dream animals, spirit animals, archetypes. The horses in Chauvet don't just stand there. They flow across the rock, their lines following natural contours, emerging from cracks and bulges as if they're swimming up from inside the stone itself. The artists use the three-dimensional topology of the cave walls to create the illusion of depth, of movement, of animals that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They saw themselves transformed. The hybrid figures aren't monsters, they're possibilities. They're the experience of becoming other, of shedding human consciousness and taking on animal perception. Every hunter knows this experience, at least partially. That moment when you stop thinking about the deer and start thinking like the deer. When prediction becomes empathy, becomes merger. The shaman in the cave was perfecting this, using trance states to achieve complete transformation, to fully embody the animal they needed to understand. They saw patterns, the underlying structure of reality, the geometric framework that consciousness uses to construct experience. And they recorded these faithfully, leaving evidence that human perception hasn't changed in 40,000 years. We see the same patterns in meditation, in hypnagogia, in sensory deprivation. The same grids, the same spirals, the same nested curves, the same basic forms that consciousness uses to build worlds. But here's what really makes you wonder. These paintings aren't distributed randomly through the caves. They're placed very specifically, often in the most difficult to reach locations, chambers where you have to crawl through water, squeeze through gaps barely wide enough for a human body, climb down shafts using nothing but fingerholds in wet stone. Why put art there, unless the journey itself was the point, unless the act of penetrating deeper into the earth, of overcoming obstacles, of risking danger in pursuit of vision, was itself part of the ritual, part of the dream work. Some paintings are placed so high on chamber walls that you'd need scaffolding to create them. Archaeological evidence shows they did build scaffolds, carefully constructed from wood that had to be carried deep underground. Imagine the effort, the planning, the determination to place a specific image in a specific location. That's not decoration, that's cosmology, that's mapping the spirit world onto physical space. These weren't art galleries, they were laboratories of consciousness, places where prehistoric humans were systematically exploring the frontiers of awareness, documenting their findings in the only permanent medium available. Stone. We're looking at humanity's first dream journals, the earliest records of human beings taking their inner experiences seriously enough to preserve them, to share them, to say to future generations, this is what we saw when we looked inside. This is where consciousness can go. This matters. And maybe, deep in those dark chambers by flickering lamplight, exhausted from fasting and dancing and breathing the smoke of sacred plants, they were closer to the truth of existence than we've been since. Maybe they understood something we've forgotten, that the boundary between dreaming and waking is thinner than we think, that the animals and spirits and impossible beings they painted weren't fantasies. They were residents of a world just as real as the one outside the cave, a world you could visit if you knew the way, if you were brave enough to descend into darkness and see what looked back. Picture this. You're a Neanderthal living in what's now southern France, about 70,000 years ago. Your grandmother died 3 days ago. During the day, you helped dig her grave, watched as the group carefully positioned her body facing east, placed her stone tools beside her. You understood somehow that she was gone. But that night, you close your eyes and there she is, moving, talking, warning you about the bison herd near the river. She's as real as she ever was. More real, maybe, because in the dream she knows things she couldn't have known in life. You wake up confused, shaken. Your grandmother is dead. You buried her yourself, felt her cold skin, smelled the beginning of decay. But you also just saw her, spoke with her. She gave you information, specific details about where to find game. Both things are true. Your brain has no framework for reconciling them, so you create one, and in doing so, you invent the concept of the soul. This wasn't a single moment, obviously. It wasn't one Neanderthal waking up from one dream and suddenly conceiving of an immortal spirit. But over thousands of generations, dreams of the dead created a problem that prehistoric humans desperately needed to solve. How can someone be both gone and present? Both decayed in the ground and walking, talking, interacting? The answer our ancestors came up with would reshape human civilization forever. The dead don't really die. Some part of them continues. Some essence, some spirit, some soul that can visit the living in dreams. The archaeological evidence for this cognitive revolution is everywhere once you know how to look for it. The Neanderthal burial at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, discovered in the 1950s, contained pollen from multiple flower species arranged around the body. For decades, archaeologists debated whether this was intentional or just contamination from burrowing animals. But chemical analysis has confirmed it. Someone, 60,000 years ago, gathered flowers and placed them with the dead. Not for practical reasons. Flowers don't preserve bodies or keep away scavengers. They serve no survival function. This was purely symbolic behavior. The flowers meant something. They represented something. And the most likely explanation is that they represented the continuation of the person in some other form. The body was dead, but something else, the part that appeared in dreams, deserved respect, comfort, beauty. Similar burials have been found across Neanderthal territories. At La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, a Neanderthal was buried in a deliberately dug grave with joints of meat and stone tools. At Teshiktash in Uzbekistan, a child's grave was surrounded by a circle of ibex horns. These weren't casual disposals of bodies. These were rituals, elaborate, time-consuming, resource-intensive rituals performed for people who would never benefit from them in any material sense. Unless, of course, they would benefit. Unless the part that appeared in dreams was still somehow present, still capable of needing things, still capable of being pleased or angered by how the living treated their remains. Modern humans were doing the same thing. The burial at Kafsa Cave in Israel, dated to about 100,000 years ago, shows a modern human child buried with red ochre and a deer antler. Again, no practical purpose. Pure symbolism. The child was dead, but some aspect of that child, the aspect that might visit her parents in dreams, received gifts, received care. This is the birth of religious thinking. Not theology, not organized doctrine, but the fundamental religious intuition that there are two worlds, the visible world of physical bodies and material objects, and the invisible world of spirits, essences, souls. The world you inhabit when you're awake, and the world you visit in dreams. And here's what makes this absolutely crucial to understanding prehistoric consciousness. Dreams of the dead aren't random. They're incredibly consistent across cultures and time periods. Modern humans who dream of deceased loved ones report remarkably similar experiences. The dead appear healthy, often younger than they were at death. They communicate important information, sometimes warnings, sometimes comfort. They seem to exist in a place that's familiar but not quite real, dreamlike, spiritual. Your prehistoric ancestors experienced exactly the same thing. Their brains were structurally identical to ours. Their REM sleep functioned the same way. When they dreamed of their dead, they saw the same kinds of visions we see today. And they reached for the same explanation we instinctively reach for before rationality kicks in. The person isn't really gone. They're just somewhere else, somewhere we can access in sleep. This belief would have spread rapidly once it emerged. because it solves a fundamental psychological problem. Grief. Humans are intensely social. We form deep emotional bonds. When someone we love dies, especially suddenly, our brains struggle to process it. We expect to see them, hear their voice, share meals with them. Then they've gone. The absence is excruciating. But dreams offer relief. In dreams, the dead return, not as corpses, but as themselves, whole, present, interactive. These dreams are so vivid, so emotionally powerful, that treating them as mere neural noise would feel wrong. It would be denying the obvious evidence of your own experience. So instead, you construct a world view in which dreams are real. Another kind of reality, maybe. A different realm, but real. And if dreams are real, then the dead who appear in them are real too. Not their bodies, obviously. You've seen what happens to bodies, but their essence, their spirit, the part that makes them who they are. Once this belief takes hold, everything changes. Suddenly the world is populated by invisible beings, ancestors watching over you, judging your actions, intervening in your life through dreams and visions. This would have had immediate practical effects on behavior. If your dead grandmother could still observe you, if she could be pleased or disappointed by your choices, you'd probably behave differently, more carefully, more in accordance with the values she taught you. This is social control through supernatural belief, and it's incredibly powerful. Physical authority can only enforce rules when someone's watching, but ancestral spirits are always watching. They see you in your dreams, they know your thoughts. This belief would have helped maintain social cohesion and moral behavior even in small dispersed groups where direct oversight was impossible. But some individuals would have been better than others at accessing this spirit world. Some people naturally have more vivid dreams, more frequent encounters with the dead. Some people, even today, experience hypnagogic hallucinations, seeing and hearing things in the twilight between waking and sleep. In prehistoric populations, these individuals would have become specialists, the first shamans. Shamanism is found in virtually every human culture. From the Arctic to the Amazon, from Africa to Australia, small-scale human societies develop specialists who can deliberately enter altered states of consciousness and interact with the spirit world. They use different techniques, drums, fasting, psychoactive plants, but the core practice is universal. The shaman leaves ordinary reality and travels to the realm where ancestors and spirits dwell. This practice almost certainly predates modern human expansion out of Africa. The neural capacities required are present in all human populations. The psychological needs it addresses are fundamental to human experience, and the archaeological evidence of elaborate burials and symbolic behavior among Neanderthals suggests they too might have had individuals who specialized in mediating between the living and the dead. Imagine being that person in your group, the one whose dreams are more vivid, more consistent, more apparently meaningful than others. You dream of the hunt before it happens. You dream of your grandfather, and he tells you where to find water during a drought. You wake up, share your dreams, and events unfold as predicted. Not every time, but often enough that patterns emerge. Often enough that people start asking you to dream for them, to seek guidance from the ancestors on their behalf. You develop techniques to make this more reliable. You isolate yourself before sleep. You fast, making yourself lightheaded, more susceptible to visions. Maybe you discover certain plants that make dreams more intense, more memorable. You create rituals, repetitive actions that signal to your brain that you're about to enter sacred space. And gradually you become something your group has never had before, a religious specialist. Someone who can navigate between worlds. This is the foundation of every religious tradition that would follow. Priests, prophets, oracles, medicine men, they all trace back to these prehistoric individuals who claimed special access to the realm of spirits. the realm they visited in dreams. But these early shamans weren't just providing comfort or maintaining social order. They were creating an entirely new category of human experience, sacred experience. The feeling that certain times, places, and actions are different from ordinary life, set apart, connected to something deeper and more permanent. When you entered a cave to dream of your ancestors, that cave became sacred space. When you painted images of the visions you saw there, those images became sacred objects. When you performed the rituals that helped induce visionary states, those actions became sacred practices. You were creating religion, not as a system of beliefs about gods and afterlife that would come much later, but as a lived experience of connection to something beyond the immediate physical world. And all of it started with the simple, universal, human experience of dreaming about someone you loved who died. Your brain, trying to process grief and loss, creates a vivid image of the person. You experience it as real contact, real presence, and rather than dismissing it as neural noise, you take it seriously. You build a world view around it. You develop practices to facilitate it. You create specialists who can do it reliably. Within a few thousand generations, every human population on Earth has developed some version of ancestor veneration, some belief that the dead persist in another realm, some practice of communicating with them through dreams and visions. The details vary wildly, but the core intuition is universal. Death isn't the end. The spirits continue, and in dreams we can still reach them. We're all descendants of people who believed this, all products of cultures shaped by the conviction that another world exists parallel to this one, a world we visit in sleep, a world where the dead still live, and whether or not that belief reflects any objective reality, it transformed human civilization. It gave us our first sense of the sacred, our first religious experiences, our first glimpse of something beyond mere survival. All from the mystery of why the dead keep appearing in our dreams. Picture a night 40,000 years ago. Somewhere in what's now southern France, a band of humans huddles around a fire. The darkness beyond the flames is absolute, pressing in from all sides. In that darkness live lions, hyenas, bears. But inside the firelight circle, there's safety, warmth, and something else. Stories. One of the hunters begins to speak. His voice rises and falls with an urgency that commands attention. He's describing something he experienced while sleeping. A vision. In this vision, he says, he flew. Not like running or jumping, but actual flight, soaring above the valley like a raven. He saw the herds from above, saw the patterns they made moving across the landscape, saw the best places to intercept them. The others listen intently. Some nod. They've had similar experiences. These night visions, these adventures that happen when the body sleeps but the mind travels, they're important. They mean something. What you're witnessing is the birth of mythology, the moment when dreams stopped being private experiences and became shared narratives, stories that would be told and retold, refined and embellished, until they became the founding myths of entire cultures. This wasn't a sudden invention. It was an evolutionary process that probably began as soon as humans developed language sophisticated enough to describe internal experiences. But the archaeological record suggests something accelerated around 40,000 to 50,000 years ago. That's when we start seeing the explosion of symbolic art, the elaboration of burial practices, the evidence of complex ritual behavior. Something was changing in the human mind, and dreams were at the center of it. Think about what dreams would have meant to prehistoric humans. They had no concept of neuroscience, no understanding that dreams were generated by their own sleeping brains. To them, dreams were experiences, real journeys to other realms, encounters with beings that existed somewhere beyond waking reality. When a hunter dreamed of speaking with his dead father, that wasn't metaphor. His father's spirit had actually visited him. When a gatherer dreamed of transforming into a deer, she had genuinely experienced that transformation, at least in some reality parallel to the waking world. This interpretation wasn't primitive or naive. It was logical. Dreams felt real. The emotions were real. The sensory experiences, seeing, hearing, sometimes even touching and tasting, were indistinguishable from waking experiences. Why would you assume they were less valid than what happened when your eyes were open? So dreams became data, information from another realm, messages from ancestors, warnings from spirits, glimpses of possible futures. And like all important information, they needed to be shared, discussed, interpreted by the group. The campfire became the first theatre. The dream recitation became the first performance art. And gradually, certain dream narratives began to take on lives of their own. Here's where it gets really interesting. If you look at mythologies from around the world, cultures that had no contact with each other for tens of thousands of years, you find the same themes appearing again and again, the same story structures, the same types of characters and challenges and resolutions. Why? Coincidence? Shared history from before the great human diaspora? Maybe. But there's another explanation. These universal themes might reflect universal dream experiences, dream patterns that emerge from the structure of the human brain itself. Take flying dreams. Nearly everyone has them. That sensation of lifting off the ground, soaring through the air with impossible ease. It's one of the most commonly reported dream experiences across all cultures and time periods. Now look at mythology. How many cultures have stories of humans who could fly or transform into birds? The answer is essentially all of them. Bird symbolism shows up in the earliest cave art. Shamanic traditions worldwide involve spiritual flight, the soul taking bird form to travel to other realms. Ancient Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, Norse, Chinese, Polynesian, Native American mythologies all feature humans becoming birds or bird-human hybrids. Could this near-universal mythological theme have originated from the near-universal experience of flying dreams? It's not hard to imagine. A prehistoric dreamer wakes from a vivid flight dream. She describes it around the fire. Others share similar experiences. Gradually, these individual dream reports coalesce into a shared narrative. The idea that humans have a bird self, a spirit form that can fly. From there, it's a small step to ritual practices designed to invoke that bird self. Wearing feathers, performing bird-like movements, entering trance states to deliberately access the flying experience. The dream becomes myth. The myth becomes ritual. The ritual reinforces the myth. Transformation dreams work the same way. Dreams where you become an animal or another person are incredibly common. The sense of inhabiting a different body, seeing through different eyes, having different abilities. It's disorienting, powerful, often deeply memorable. And what do we find in mythologies worldwide? Shapeshifters, humans who can become wolves, bears, jaguars, seals, gods who take animal forms, animals who can become human. The ability to cross the boundary between species is one of the most persistent themes in human storytelling. In Europe, werewolf legends. In South America, jaguar transformation. In the Arctic, selkies who shift between seal and human form. In Asia, fox spirits. In Africa, hyena people. Every culture, every continent, variations on the same essential theme. Humans becoming animals, animals becoming humans. These aren't just random stories. They're too consistent, too widespread. They reflect something fundamental about human consciousness. and that something is probably the experience of transformation dreams, where the boundaries of identity become fluid and the impossible becomes temporarily real. But perhaps the most profound dream influence on mythology comes from what scholars call the hero's journey. This narrative pattern, identified by mythologist Joseph Campbell, appears in stories across virtually all human cultures. A protagonist leaves the ordinary world, faces trials in a special realm, gains power or knowledge, and returns transformed. It shows up in ancient Mesopotamian epics, Greek hero myths, Hindu scriptures, African folk tales, Polynesian legends, stories separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, all following essentially the same structure. Why? Campbell argued it reflected universal human psychological experiences, but there's another possibility. It might reflect universal dream structure. Think about how dreams typically unfold. You find yourself in a situation, often strange or challenging. Normal rules don't apply. You face obstacles that require you to act in ways you couldn't in waking life. You encounter beings, helpers, or adversaries who guide or test you. Eventually you return to normal reality, often with a feeling that something significant has occurred, even if you can't quite articulate what. Sound familiar? It's the hero's journey, scene by scene, beat by beat. What if the reason the hero's journey appears in mythologies worldwide isn't because it reflects some abstract psychological archetype, but because it literally describes the structure of common dream narratives? The hero's journey might be the dream journey, encoded in story form. If this is true, then much of mythology might be collective dream reporting. Individual dreams shared around fires, refined through retelling, eventually codified into formal narratives that get passed down through generations. This would explain why mythological stories often have that dreamlike quality. The fluid logic, the sudden transformations, the way time and space work differently. Characters who are simultaneously human and animal, living and dead. Landscapes that shift and change. Impossible tasks that nevertheless get completed. These aren't failures of logic or primitive thinking. They're accurate representations of dream experience, preserved in narrative form. The implications are staggering. It would mean that for tens of thousands of years, humans have been maintaining oral traditions that originated as dream reports, that the foundational stories of human cultures, the myths that shaped religions and philosophies and worldviews, might have their roots in the sleeping mind. Consider how this would work practically. In a small band of hunter-gatherers, maybe 30 or 40 people, someone has a particularly vivid or unusual dream. They describe it around the fire. Others recognize elements from their own dreams, add their experiences. The story grows, becomes more elaborate. When this band encounters another group, they share stories. Some dream narratives prove especially compelling, spreading from group to group. Over generations, the best stories, the ones that resonate most deeply with common human experiences, survive and propagate. The others fade away. Over thousands of years, you'd end up with a collection of narratives refined through countless retellings. Stories that worked, that touched something fundamental in human consciousness. And because they originated from dream experiences, which are shaped by universal features of human neurobiology, you'd expect to find similar stories emerging independently in different cultures. Which is exactly what we find. The flying dreams become stories of shamanic flight. The transformation dreams become shapeshifter myths. The chase dreams, where you're pursued by something threatening, become stories of monsters and demons. The dreams of deceased relatives become ancestor worship and concepts of the afterlife. The anxiety dreams of losing teeth or falling become omens and warnings in folklore. Dream by dream, story by story, mythology emerges. not as fiction or fantasy, but as the most accurate description available to prehistoric humans of what seemed like journeys to another realm. Real experiences that demanded explanation and integration into the group's understanding of reality. And here's the beautiful part. This process never stopped. We're still doing it. Modern storytelling, from novels to films to video games, still draws on these ancient dream-born narrative patterns. The hero's journey structure dominates contemporary fiction. Transformation and flight remain central metaphors. We're still telling the same stories our ancestors dreamed 40,000 years ago. We've just forgotten where they came from. Forgotten that before they were myths and legends and sacred texts, they were one person waking up beside a fire saying, "I had the strangest dream," and others leaning in close to listen. Imagine this. The fire is burning low. Most of the camp is asleep, curled in cloaks of animal hide, breathing in slow, uneven rhythms. Outside the ring of light, the world is black and endless. Predators move somewhere out there. The river murmurs in the distance. Above, the sky is a cold bowl of stars. You're not asleep, not yet. Tomorrow your group has to decide. Food is running low. The herds you've been following for weeks have vanished into the distance. The water in the nearby stream is shrinking a little more each day. You could stay and hope things get better, or you could move. But move where? North, toward the distant hills. West, toward the coast. South, where another group was last seen weeks ago? If you choose wrong, you don't just waste energy. You might walk your family straight into starvation. In the modern world, you check satellite data, rainfall charts, maybe crowd-sourced weather apps. In the prehistoric world, your ancestors had something else. They had dreams. Not just private, hidden mental movies, public, shared, debated material. A kind of nighttime council meeting held inside people's brains. And in a world where one bad decision could mean extinction, those dreams could start to look a lot like prophecies. During the day, your ancestors' brains were overloaded. Every moment was filled with decisions that had to be made now. Is that rustle in the grass a predator? Is that stranger a threat? Is that cloud formation a sign of coming storms? There was no pause button, no quiet office to sit and think, no notebook to spread out information and see how it all fit together. So their brains did something clever. They waited until everyone lay down. Modern neuroscience tells us that when we sleep, our brains don't just shut off. They become strangely active, different, but not silent. Patterns of activity sweep through memory centers like the hippocampus, replaying the day's events in compressed form. Emotional regions like the amygdala stay active, tagging memories with feelings. The prefrontal cortex, the part that carefully censors and organizes our thoughts, loosens its grip. This combination does something extraordinary. It takes scattered scraps of experience and recombines them. It looks for patterns we didn't notice while we were awake. It tests out possibilities. It searches for answers without our conscious permission. Today we call it sleeping on it. We know that if you study a problem and then sleep, you're more likely to wake up with a solution, or at least a better sense of direction. Musicians learn songs faster if they sleep between practice sessions. Gamers unconsciously improve at complex tasks after a night's rest. Scientists stuck on a difficult problem sometimes wake up with a sudden insight. The dreaming brain is a problem-solving brain. Now place that brain in a prehistoric environment. No writing, no maps, no weather forecasts, no spreadsheets. The only storage device for information is the nervous system itself. Every trail you walked, every herd you saw, every storm cloud on the horizon, every rumor from a visiting stranger, every faint smell of distant water. You carried it all in your head. At night, while your body rested by the fire, your brain ran the data. Think of a hunter who has spent days tracking a herd. He's noticed tiny signs without fully realizing it. The way the grass lies in certain valleys, the direction the wind carried the animal's scent last season, the subtle dryness in the air. He lies down by the flames, his muscles aching, his stomach half empty. In his dreams he sees the herd again. But now, in the dream, they aren't where he left them. They are further east, beyond a ridge he hasn't yet climbed. Maybe the dream adds details, clouds piling up over that ridge, a glint of water in a distant hollow, vultures circling in the sky. When he wakes, he doesn't think, "My hippocampus recombined stored perceptual traces to generate a probabilistic model of ungulate movement." He thinks, "I saw them, in the night, east." To us that sounds like intuition. To him, living in a world without neuroscience, that feels prophetic. We know from modern sleep research that the brain is exceptionally good at this unconscious calculation. It can combine weak signals into strong hunches. It can use thousands of tiny impressions, half-noticed animal tracks, distant bird calls, the faint smell of rain on a breeze, and build an internal prediction model. That model feels, from the inside, like a vision. And here's where it gets really interesting. Across dozens of indigenous cultures today, from the Amazon to the Arctic, dreams are not treated as random noise. They are treated as information, as data, as guidance. Among many hunter-gatherer societies, dreams help decide where to hunt, when to plant, when to move camp. An experienced elder might dream of a particular valley, or a certain animal, or an encounter with a spirit that symbolizes luck or danger. The next morning the group discusses it. They don't always follow it blindly, but they don't ignore it either. It becomes one more input to the decision-making process. Anthropologists who live with these communities report something striking. People don't divide the world into real life and just dreams the way modern industrial societies do. The dream world is simply another mode of experience, another way of learning about reality. Encounters in dreams can be as meaningful as encounters while awake. If this is how many traditional societies use dreams today, there's every reason to think prehistoric people did something similar. In fact, for them, dreams may have been even more central, because they had fewer alternative tools for long-range planning. Imagine an early human band debating a big move. Resources are dwindling, winter is coming. The elders gather by the fire. They speak about what they've seen, the condition of the plants, the tracks of animals, the shape of the river, the known locations of neighbouring groups. But they also ask a different question. Who dreamed? One woman describes seeing a path leading toward the mountains, with fruit trees heavy with food along the way. Another dreamed of a river overflowing its banks, drowning the camp if they stayed. A hunter dreamed of being lost in a dry plain, watching his children grow thin and silent. Each dream is weighed, compared, argued over. Some are dismissed, some are taken seriously. One perhaps comes from a person whose past dreams came true, often enough that people remember. When he speaks, the group falls quiet. Without writing, without historical records, memory is your only way of testing whose dreams are worth listening to. And so slowly, across hundreds of generations, a new kind of status begins to form, the social role of the dream sharer. In any band, some people dream more vividly than others. Some remember their dreams in detail. Some are better storytellers, able to paint the night's images in words, gestures, and symbols that others can feel. Some have personalities that draw attention, calm, observant, older, or just strangely compelling. If their prophetic dreams happen to coincide with good decisions, migrating at the right time, hunting in the right valley, avoiding a dangerous flood, people notice. They survive because of it, and survival over time turns into respect. These people might not be shamans yet in any formal sense, but they become something like early specialists in the invisible. Their authority doesn't come from physical strength or hunting skill. It comes from their perceived connection to a deeper pattern, a hidden layer of reality that shows itself in dreams. In a world where everything important is uncertain, the weather, the herds, rival groups, predators, anyone who seems to reduce that uncertainty even a little becomes valuable. We can imagine how this might have played out. A group is split on whether to move. One faction argues for staying, another for leaving. The debate circles around and around with no clear solution. Then someone turns to the old dreamer sitting by the fire. What did you see? When that question becomes normal, when people routinely ask, what did you dream? Before major choices, dreams are no longer just personal private experiences. They become part of the decision architecture of the group, a kind of early policy advisory system running on biological hardware. Over time, this could crystallize into roles we'd recognize: seers, visionaries, people whose dreams carry special weight. The first stirrings of religious authority may have grown from this soil. Leadership grounded not only in what someone does while awake, but in what they bring back from the dark. Underneath the mysteries and symbols, though, something more basic was always happening. Dreams were processing data. Every day your ancestors were flooded with sensory information. Thousands of details about plants, animals, people, weather, landscape. They didn't have books or charts to store and organize this information, but their nervous systems could do it for them. Sleep is when the brain decides what to keep and what to throw away. Important survival-relevant memories are strengthened. Useless noise is discarded. Experiences are linked together, so you learn that certain winds mean certain storms, that certain smells mean certain animals, that a faint change in the colour of the leaves might mean water or drought. When those patterns are strong enough, they start to appear in dreams. A dry wind in your dreams might foreshadow a dry season in reality. A vision of fat animals moving past a certain cliff might reflect dozens of half-noticed clues that, taken together, point to that migration route. From the outside, it looks supernatural. From the inside, it feels like revelation. The truth is more subtle. Prophetic dreams don't have to bend the laws of physics to be powerful. They just have to compress reality. To take weeks, months, or years of lived experience and condense it into a single vivid scenario your waking mind can finally understand. A prehistoric leader waking up after such a dream wouldn't say, "My brain performed a multivariable optimization on my fragmentary environmental data." They would say, "The spirits showed me." Both sentences describe the same event, one in the language of science, one in the language of myth. What matters is that the decision changed. The group moved at the right moment. They found water. They survived the winter. As you lie there now, listening in the dark, your own brain is quietly doing the same thing. Sorting, sifting, binding together today's loose threads with memories from long ago, trying to find patterns that will help you face tomorrow a little more prepared. We don't always listen to our dreams anymore. We've built other systems, statistics, simulations, long-range forecasting. But under all that, the ancient machinery is still running. The bottleneck survivors who learn to trust the strange logic of sleep passed that machinery on to us. Their dreams guided migrations across continents, hunts that meant life or death, alliances that shaped entire bloodlines. They turned drifting images into choices, choices into survival, survival into stories, and stories into authority. In the glow of a small fire 300,000 years ago, someone is speaking softly, describing what they saw last night beyond the veil of sleep. Others are leaning in, listening, weighing, deciding. The first boardroom, the first council, the first strategic planning session, held not in a building, but in a ring of sleeping bodies under the stars. And tomorrow, when the sun rises and the group begins to move, their path across the landscape will be traced not only by footprints in the dust, but by dreams that no longer exist, except in the direction they chose to walk. The night for them was never just rest. It was a time when the future quietly whispered to the present in a language made of images, symbols, and shadows, a language we still speak every time we close our eyes. Nightmares weren't a modern invention. They were there from the beginning. You lie down on a bed. They lay down on the ground. Maybe it's a patch of flattened grass under a thorn tree. Maybe it's the packed earth of a shallow cave, or a little hollow scooped into the sand, warm from the fire that's just burned down to embers. Above you, a ceiling, a roof, electric lights, the quiet hum of refrigerators and distant traffic. Above them, nothing. Just a sky so black it almost feels solid, pierced by a Milky Way so bright it casts shadows. The fire flickers and cracks. Beyond its light, the world dissolves into absolute darkness. And somewhere out there in that darkness, things are awake. Hyenas, lions, leopards, giant constrictor snakes sliding silently through the grass, crocodiles slipping into river shallows, and not just animals, other humans, other bands, strangers whose intentions are unclear until it's too late. You close your eyes in a world where a locked door and a solid wall stand between you and whatever wants to hurt you. They closed their eyes in a world where the line between safety and death was a thin ring of firewood and a few half-asleep sentries. So when they dreamed, what did their fear look like? It probably looked a lot like ours. Just stripped of our modern costumes. No office corridors, no exam rooms, no missed flights. Just teeth, claws, falling, being chased, being lost. Watching someone you love disappear into the dark and being unable to stop it. Except for them, the border between nightmare and waking life was very, very narrow. Think about the dreams you've had where something is hunting you. You're trying to run, but your legs feel heavy. The thing chasing you never quite shows its full face, but you know, in that dream way, that if it catches you, you die. For a prehistoric human, that wasn't a metaphor. That was Tuesday. During the day, they learned over and over what it meant to be prey as well as predator. To hear the cough of a lion before it pounced, to smell rot on the wind and know a carcass was near, and that scavengers and then larger hunters would be there soon, to see the broken branch, the fresh tracks, the sudden silence of birds, and every one of those experiences burned patterns into the brain. The amygdala, the alarm center, learning, this shadow, this sound, this smell equals threat. At night, when the prefrontal cortex relaxed its grip and the dreaming brain started shuffling through memory, those patterns lit up. The brain ran simulations. What if the lion comes from the left instead of the right? What if the river floods higher than last time? What if the stranger with the scarred face doesn't smile next time he visits? The result? Nightmares. Not random horrors, but training exercises dressed as terror. Evolutionary dress rehearsals. Researchers today talk about something called the threat simulation theory of dreams. The idea is that dreams, and especially bad dreams, let us rehearse dangerous situations in a safe environment. They take our worst fears and run them again and again, so that when something even vaguely similar happens in waking life, we're a little bit faster, a little bit sharper, a little bit more prepared. For you, that might mean the classic, showing up to school unprepared dream morphs into being extra careful about deadlines. For them, it could be the difference between freezing in panic when they hear that rustle in the tall grass, and instinctively moving toward the nearest tree, the nearest rock, the nearest stick that could become a weapon. Nightmares keep you alive by scaring you to death, over and over, without the actual dying part. Now amplify all of this by the darkness they lived in. We underestimate how bright our nights are. Street lights, car headlights, the glow of cities on the horizon. Even out in what we call the wilderness, you can usually see the outline of your hand, the horizon, the shape of trees, and if you really need it, you have a flashlight on your phone. They had fire, moonlight, starlight. And when the fire sank too low, when clouds covered the moon, the dark was not poetic, not metaphorical. It was literally sightless, a space where your other senses strain just to keep you alive. You hear a branch snap. Is it the wind, a boar, a lion? You smell something unfamiliar. Is it damp earth, rot? Another camp somewhere upwind. You feel the ground vibrate. Is it thunder, a herd moving, or something just big enough and hungry enough to be a problem? And even when nothing is there, your brain doesn't know that. It errs on the side of overreacting. Better to wake up sweating for no reason than to miss the one real threat hiding in the bushes. So you go to sleep with your body already keyed up, heart rate higher, muscles slightly tense. The result? More arousals, more fragments of REM sleep, more vivid, intense dreams, and more nightmares. Darkness didn't just surround their dreams, it soaked into them. But not all fears come from things outside the body. Sometimes the terror comes from your own nervous system misfiring. Imagine this. You're one of those ancestors, lying on your side near the fire. Everyone around you is breathing slow, deep, sleep. The air is cool. The embers glow red. Owls call from far off. You drift down into REM sleep. Your brain, like ours, flips a safety switch. To keep you from acting out your dreams, it paralyzes your muscles from the neck down. You're dreaming of running, of fighting, of climbing. But your physical body is motionless. Then suddenly you half wake up, your eyes open. You see the cave ceiling or the branches above you or the faint dome of stars, but you can't move. Your chest is heavy. Your breathing is shallow. You try to call out and no sound comes. Something is sitting on you. Something is in the room. You can see a shape in the dark, just beyond the firelight, just beyond the edge of your vision. It feels like it's watching you, leaning close, breathing on your face. You're fully conscious, but your body is still locked in REM paralysis. In our world, if this happens to you, you can Google sleep paralysis and find thousands of people describing the same thing. The chest pressure, the sense of an intruder, the shadow figure, the buzzing, the vibrations, the absolute certainty that something is in the room with you and that it is not friendly. Your ancestors had no name for it. All they knew is that every so often someone would jolt awake, not quite awake, eyes wide, mouth open, completely unable to move. They'd later describe, in whatever early language they had, a weight on the chest, a demon, a spirit, an animal made of darkness, a visitor from somewhere else. Night after night, decade after decade, century after century, these experiences accumulated, passed from one frightened storyteller to the next. The night pressers, the shadow people, the things that sit on you while you're asleep. Over time, these raw experiences, this neurological hiccup that nearly all humans are capable of, could easily harden into myth. Spirits that come in the night and steal your breath, witches that ride you in your sleep, ancestral ghosts that sit on your chest to warn you of danger, or punish you, or claim you. Demons that lurk at the edge of the firelight looking for cracks in your camp's defences, trying to slip in when your body is most vulnerable. From the outside, it sounds like superstition. From the inside, lying there unable to move, it feels utterly real. And remember, in their world, there really were predators that waited for weakness. There really were enemies who might creep in under cover of darkness. You didn't have to stretch your imagination very far to believe that unseen forces could visit you at night. So nightmares weren't just movies played on the inside of their skulls. They were part of a whole ecosystem of fear and meaning. Predators, storms, sickness, strangers, and also invisible things, feelings, presences, the sense that death and danger had personalities, moods, intentions. And when the sun came up, what did they do with all of this? They talked. We tend to imagine prehistoric humans as wordless, grim, focused only on survival. But everything we know about later hunter-gatherers and about our own minds points in another direction. Humans tell each other what happened to them, especially the scary things, especially at night. Picture a group at dawn. The fire has been stirred back to life. Someone is poking at last night's ashes. Someone else is chewing a root. A child is still half asleep in their mother's lap. One of the hunters says, "I saw them again, the lions, but not like last time. They came from behind the trees. The wind was wrong. I couldn't smell them." Everybody listens, because last time 2 people died. He describes the dream in detail, where he was standing, how close the animals got. What went wrong? Is he just sharing a bad night? Or is his brain subconsciously warning him, and everyone else, about a possible blind spot? A scenario they haven't practiced yet? Either way, the group now has more information. They may laugh it off. They may tease him. They may also quietly shift where they position the watchers that night. They may suggest moving camp sooner. They may tell the children, "If you hear that sound, don't run this way, run that way." Nightmares become public property, collective simulations, and not just about animals. A mother dreams of her child wandering too close to the river and being taken by a crocodile. The child is fine in the morning, but after she tells the dream, do you think anyone is going to let that kid play by the water alone? A young man dreams he's arguing with someone from another band. In the dream, a fight breaks out. Someone is injured. Alliances are broken. The next time actual visitors arrive from that band, he's just a little more cautious. The group's leaders are a little more careful with their words, their gifts, their posture. Over thousands of years, this constant sharing of dream fear could act like a primitive warning system, an emotional radar, picking up threats not just from the world as it is, but from the world as it could be. And there's another side to this. When you face a fear in a dream and wake up alive, something subtle changes. The first time you dream of falling, you wake up with your heart pounding, your hands sweaty, your stomach flipping. The 10th time it happens, the fear is still there, but there's also a thin layer of familiarity. I know this. I've been here before. For our ancestors, nightmares weren't just drills. They were exposure therapy. You repeatedly experience loss, separation, danger, humiliation, helplessness in a space where, no matter how bad it gets, you have a chance to wake up and reset. Some mornings you wake up sobbing. Some mornings you wake up angry, but you always wake up. Over time, that might build a kind of psychological callus. You're still afraid of lions, you're still afraid of losing your children, your partner, your status in the group, but you're not destroyed by the feeling of fear itself. You've practiced sitting with it. You've learned that terror rises, peaks, and then fades. In a world where you will at some point see someone die in front of you, where you will lose friends to disease, where you might go hungry for days, that emotional resilience is not optional, it's survival equipment. So when we talk about the origins of symbolic thinking, of religion, of myth and art, we're not just talking about the bright, visionary, beautiful side of the human mind. We're also talking about this shadow side, the horror, the panic, the things that make you wake up with your heart pounding and your throat tight. Predators in the grass, eyes in the dark, invisible visitors that sit on your chest, dead relatives who appear in dreams, accusing or comforting or warning, strange, impossible landscapes where the rules of physics break and reform. All of that fed into the stories they told, the spirits they named, the rituals they invented to keep the bad dreams away. And all of that is still with us. When you wake up from a nightmare today and feel, for a few seconds, like something is in the room with you, watching, you're not just having a random bad night. You're feeling the echo of hundreds of thousands of years of human fear compressed into a few minutes of REM. You're practicing, like they did, for dangers that may never come, but that your brain refuses to stop preparing for. In that sense, every nightmare is a tiny time machine. A brief return to the nights when the darkness outside the campfire was full of real teeth and real claws, and when the only way to stay sane was to share the terror with each other, turn it into story, and somehow learn to sleep again. Close your eyes again for a moment and pay attention to the kinds of dreams you actually have. Not the rare cinematic ones where you're a superhero or a celebrity. The ordinary ones, the ones that keep showing up. You're running, but your legs feel like they're made of mud. Something is chasing you, but you can't quite see what it is. You're falling from a great height. You're suddenly back in school, unprepared for a test. You're trying to scream, but no sound comes out. Or just as strange in a different way, you're floating. You step off the ground and realize you can fly. At first it's clumsy, like learning to walk again. Then you're gliding over rooftops, forests, strangers' houses. The world looks small, distant, harmless. These aren't random images, they're patterns. And what's eerie is that they show up in dream reports from all over the world. Different cultures, different languages, different histories, same themes. Being chased, falling, flying, being trapped, losing teeth, showing up naked in public. No matter where you go, the human brain seems to be pulling from the same short list. Now imagine your ancestor 60,000 years ago, lying beside a dying fire in a rock shelter somewhere in East Africa. Outside, hyenas laugh in the dark. The smell of smoke, blood, and animal fat hangs in the air. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolls over a savanna that is more predator than prey. They drift into REM sleep. What do they dream? A distant rustle in the grass suddenly becomes a lion's pounce. They run, but their legs don't respond. They try to climb a tree and feel themselves slipping, fingers clawing at rough bark as the ground falls away beneath them. Or maybe they dream they're standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking a river, and the rock suddenly breaks. The body jerks awake, heart pounding, lungs burning, every muscle ready to sprint, even though nothing actually happened. It's the same falling dream, the same chase, the same helplessness, separated by tens of thousands of years, but the script is almost identical. That's the first piece of the legacy. The content of our dreams is still tuned to an environment our waking bodies no longer live in, but our sleeping brains never left. Think about how rarely you personally encounter real physical danger. Most people watching this will never be stalked by a big cat. You probably don't have to worry about stepping on a venomous snake every time you walk to get water. You're more likely to get an email than an ambush. And yet snakes, spiders, and big predators show up in our dreams far more often than things that actually kill us today, like cars, heart disease, or electrical outlets. Neuroscientists sometimes call this an evolutionary mismatch. Your brain evolved for one world and now has to live in another. For millions of years, the threats that shaped our nervous systems weren't traffic jams and inboxes. They were sudden drops, hidden predators, the feeling of being hunted, the terror of being separated from your group in dangerous terrain. If your ancestors didn't react fast enough to those dangers, they didn't become ancestors. Their genes fell out of the story. The result is a kind of cognitive overtraining for specific types of fear. We are born with a tendency to learn snake fear faster than plug fear, to notice movements in the grass more readily than subtle changes in credit scores. And when the conscious guard drops in sleep, those old circuits come out to play. So when you dream of being chased by a faceless thing, your brain is probably running an ancient program built for leopards, hyenas, or rival bands showing up at dawn. When you dream of falling, your body might be simulating the most catastrophic mistake a tree-dwelling or cliff-walking primate can make, misjudging the edge. The stakes are different now. You're not likely to wake up in midair. But the machinery that generates those simulations is still the same hardware that kept your ancestors alive in the Pleistocene. Even the flying dreams may have deep roots. On the surface, flying seems like the opposite of falling. One is terror, the other is freedom. But they're both about gravity. They're both about your brain's attempt to model a three-dimensional world from the safety of a horizontal position under a blanket or an animal hide. Some researchers think that flying dreams might be a kind of distorted echo of the brain's balance and spatial navigation system misfiring in REM. But on a deeper psychological level, flight is the flip side of helplessness. It's mastery over the landscape, the predator that can cross valleys in a single leap, the hunter who is no longer limited by cliffs, rivers, or distance. Your ancestor might never have imagined flight the way you do, with skyscrapers and airplanes. But they almost certainly dreamed of vantage points they didn't have, of seeing danger from far away, of moving through terrain without exhaustion or risk. The emotional core is the same, the wish to escape, to rise above, to see the world from a position of safety and control. Psychology has a word for these recurring emotional scripts that cut across cultures and eras: archetypes. In the early 20th century, Carl Jung called the shared patterns in our dreams the collective unconscious. Not a literal hive mind, but a set of deep structures in the psyche that all humans inherit. Primordial images, universal story roles, the hero, the shadow, the wise old one, the devouring mother, the trickster. Modern neuroscience doesn't use the same language, but when researchers collect thousands of dreams from people in different countries, they do see something like archetypes, repeated motifs, shared characters, similar emotional trajectories. The specific costumes change. Your nightmare pursuer might be a bear, a faceless man, a glitching robot, a nuclear mushroom cloud. Your ancestors might have been a leopard, a rival warrior, a storm turning the sky black. But underneath, both dreams feel like the same character, the overwhelming threat that can't be reasoned with. The same is true of the wise guide who appears at just the right moment in a dream. For you, it might be a teacher, a dead grandparent, a stranger in a train station who suddenly knows too much about you. For your ancestor, it might have been an elder, a tribal healer, or an animal that spoke with a human voice. Different details, same archetype. When people across cultures dream of houses with hidden rooms or endless forests, or dark caves that conceal something powerful, Jung would see the blueprint of the human mind itself. The conscious self wandering through the corridors of something much older, deeper, and more mysterious. You don't have to agree with every part of Jung's theory to feel the weight of what he was pointing at. That our dreams seem to be drawing from a library we didn't personally stock. A stack of mental storylines that existed long before we were born. From an evolutionary perspective, you could say that what Jung called the collective unconscious is just another way of describing shared neural architecture. Brains of the same species built to solve the same survival problems will tend to produce similar patterns, but from your perspective, lying in bed with your eyes closed, it doesn't really matter whether you label it archetype or circuit. What matters is that when you dream of being hunted, when you dream of flying, when you talk to the dead in your sleep, you're participating in a pattern that stretches back tens of thousands of nights. As your waking world has changed, cities instead of savannas, screens instead of stars, your dreaming brain has changed much more slowly. You scroll through glowing rectangles late into the night, moving images and text in a way that would have looked like witchcraft to any Neanderthal. You worry about deadlines, social media, microscopic viruses, geopolitics. But when you finally fall asleep, the same ancient systems take over. Your pupils twitch beneath closed lids in REM. Your muscles go limp to keep you from acting out the dream. Your emotional centers fire as if you're really in danger, really in love, really lost, really flying. And in those moments, the line between you and that ancestor in the rock shelter becomes very thin. Your brain is an archaeological site. Layer on layer of older structures buried under modern conveniences. The newest parts handle language, reading, abstract mathematics, worrying about emails. The oldest parts handle hunger, fear, sex, status, belonging. Dreams are one of the few times those older layers get to speak in something like their own language. Image, symbol, story. We have used that language to climb extraordinary heights. We have built religions out of it, mythologies, entire civilizations that took dream images and carved them into stone, painted them onto temple ceilings, turned them into epics and scriptures and novels and movies. We've harnessed the dreaming brain's creativity to make breakthroughs in science and art. Chemists have dreamed of molecular structures. Mathematicians have seen solutions in sleep. Musicians have woken up with melodies that felt like gifts from somewhere outside themselves. We have put footprints on the moon. We've sent metal eyes into deep space. We've sequenced our own DNA and read the faint ancient signature of that near-extinction bottleneck written into every cell. But we still don't fully understand why we dream. We have theories that dreams help process emotions, that they simulate threats so we're better prepared, that they help consolidate memories and update our internal models of the world, that they're side effects of the brain's housekeeping. All of these have evidence behind them. None of them feel like the whole story. From a scientific point of view, dreams are still half solved. From a personal point of view, they're even more slippery. They feel meaningful, but that meaning dissolves when we try to pin it down. They feel like messages, but from whom? Or from what? And maybe that's part of the legacy too. When your ancestor crawled out of their shelter at dawn, shaken by a dream of the dead appearing by the fire, they also didn't know why that image came. They might have interpreted it as a visitation, a warning, a blessing, or a random flicker of the soul. They might have turned it into a story for the group, a small myth. They might have kept it secret, but they wondered. The fact that you can lie in a climate-controlled room, under electric lights, on a mass-produced mattress, and ask the same kinds of questions about your own dreams. That continuity is astonishing. We think of ourselves as modern, as disconnected from the past, as living in a completely different world than they did. And in many ways, we are. But every night, when your consciousness loosens and your mind begins to drift, you join an unbroken chain of dreamers that runs back through medieval peasants and Roman merchants, through Ice Age shamans and Neanderthal hunters, through the first small bands who painted animals on cave walls by torchlight. If you could stack all those nights of sleep on top of each other, if you could line up every ancestor you've ever had in one long silent procession, and watch them close their eyes, you would see the same sudden twitches in their faces, the same rapid eye movements under their eyelids, the same little gasps in the dark, each one entering their own private theatre, each one visited by fears and desires shaped by lives you will never know. each one carrying in their skulls the same basic 3 pounds of dreaming matter that you carry now. The content of the dreams changes with the world. The form of dreaming does not. So as you lie here, listening, letting your thoughts blur at the edges, you are doing something unimaginably ancient. You're not just falling asleep at the end of a long day. You're stepping into a river that has been flowing since before there were cities, before there were written stories, before there were names for gods or stars or spirits. You're about to visit the same inner landscape that taught your ancestors how to tell stories, how to imagine spirits, how to think in symbols instead of just sensations. The legacy in your dreams is not just about snakes and falling and flying. It's about the simple fact that you dream at all. It's the proof that under the surface of everything modern, you are still one of them. One more animal lying under the sky, wrapped in darkness, wandering through the strange, flickering world that appears whenever the fire of waking life burns low. So here you are. Maybe you're lying in bed, lights low, eyes heavy. Maybe you're listening with headphones on a long train ride, or in a small apartment, or in a quiet house half a world away from where this story began. But in one sense, you're in the exact same place. Humans have always ended their days. Darkness, a tired body, a mind slipping into somewhere else. For hundreds of thousands of years, through ice ages and droughts, through volcanic winters and lush green valleys, humans have done this same simple thing, found a place to rest, closed their eyes, and let their thoughts dissolve into images and voices that no one else could see. Your distant ancestors did it on bare rock, on packed dirt, wrapped in furs, under an overhang of stone. Neanderthals did it in caves where the wind howled outside and the fire cracked and hissed. Denisovans did it in mountain shelters and on forested slopes under unfamiliar constellations. Early Homo sapiens did it in savannas and river valleys, in the shadow of predators and the echo of drums. And every night, as their bodies went still, their minds did what your mind is about to do. They dreamed. Maybe they saw the faces of people they had lost. Maybe they relived the day's hunt gone wrong, or imagined a better version where the spear flew true and the animal fell cleanly. Maybe they felt themselves floating above the camp, watching sleeping bodies from somewhere outside their own skull. Maybe they wandered through impossible landscapes where rivers flowed uphill and animals spoke with human voices. They didn't have words like REM sleep or symbolic cognition or visual cortex activation. They just had the experience. You do too. Tonight, when you drift off, your brain will fire in patterns shaped by that whole history, by the bottleneck survivors, by the pressure cooker of selection that favoured flexible minds, quick learners, expert storytellers, by the slow rise of language, ritual, art and myth, every neuron carrying the echo of solutions that worked well enough to be passed down. You are part of that unbroken experiment. Think of that for a moment. Somewhere around a flickering fire 300,000 years ago, a young human lies awake, listening to the breathing of their sleeping family. They remember a dream about a great animal that spoke in thunder, about ancestors who appeared as birds of light, about rivers of stars flowing across the sky. They don't fully understand it, but they feel it matters. They tell someone, a sibling, a parent, a child. A story is born. That line of stories never stopped. It flowed through myths told under painted cave ceilings, through whispered visions of ancestors guiding the hunt, through dreams that warned of danger and dreams that promised hope, through the first gods and the first spirits and the first heroes, through every grandmother sitting by a fire saying, "I had a strange dream last night," and now it flows. Through you. As you lie there, you're joining that chain. One more sleeper in a line that began long before our species even had a name. If this journey through ancient nights and prehistoric minds kept you company as you drifted towards sleep, and you'd like to travel further into this kind of history, you can help keep it going. When you're awake again, you can like this video, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. If you feel like sharing, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what dreams you still remember. Are you in a big city or a quiet village, under winter skies or tropical rain? Do you dream of places you've never been, of people you've never met, of strange animals or impossible landscapes? That kind of sharing turns this from just a video into a little network of dreamers scattered across the planet the same way our ancestors once were. And if someday you decide you want to support this work a little more directly, there's also the option to join the channel as a member. It helps me spend more time crafting these long, careful journeys for you. But it's completely optional. Watching, listening, and drifting off with these stories is already more than enough. For now, you don't have to do anything. Just imagine this: the lights of your room fading into the glow of a campfire, the walls around you dissolving into stone or open sky or a canopy of leaves. All around you, figures lying down, Neanderthals, Denisovans, early Homo sapiens, different faces, different bodies, different worlds, but the same slow breathing, the same eyelids fluttering as dreams begin. You lie among them, another human at the end of another long day. Above you, the stars are older than every story ever told. Inside you, the machinery of dreaming is older than your language, your culture, your city, your name. In a few moments, your own private theatre will start to play. Maybe you'll walk through a forest that never existed. Maybe you'll talk to someone who's gone. Maybe you'll meet an animal with human eyes, or stand in front of an ocean made of light. Whatever appears, remember this: you're not alone in it. You're sharing a very old human activity, one that helped turn scattered bands of primates into storytellers, artists, believers, and thinkers. One that helped build everything we now call culture. So let your thoughts slow down. Let the last words of this story blur into the first images of your next one. Feel yourself sinking gently into the same darkness that cradled our ancestors on nights when the world outside was dangerous and uncertain. But the world inside was limitless. You carry their genes, you carry their stories, and tonight you carry their dreams. Rest well, sleep deeply, and drift off with them.